Yes, Guyana to the world.
Globuspan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that is taken aside, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globuspan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation's building.
She is a beauty, beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country.
Globuspan believes every Guyanese voice is part of the nation's building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. As the world turns on its axis bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globuspan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
With many flavors, 6 different people blended together. Raise your flag high in unity, we're family with one destiny. Raise your flag high in unity.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Globuspan Television here in New York City. I'm your host, Dr. Rose, and I have with me today as our guest, Mr. Colin Welch. But before we get to him and questions, I want to let you know that this program has been made available by Mr. Noir Singh and also by Mr. Devin Kisun and Mr. Ryan Gobin, our 2 technical directors. The views expressed tonight by our guests are solely theirs and do not reflect those of the staff and management of Globuspan Television. We are a fair and balanced network. And I want to say this to all our sponsors. Thank you for sponsoring this program as well. Now, Globuspan Television can be heard. We can be heard we're broadcasting on YouTube and on Facebook as well, and other social media platforms. So you can tune in there and pick us up at any time. Thanks for tuning in, and again, welcome to Globuspan Television here in New York. Mr. Welch, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rose. It's an honor to be here.
Let me first say this, that Mr. Welch was the CEO of GPL, Guyana Power and Light, from when to when, Mr. Welch?
From 2013 to 2016.
Okay, from 2013 to 2016. And in that period of time, the consensus is that he did an excellent job, but that's a consensus. But Mr. Welch, you were the CEO from 2013 to 16, 3 years. Now, what changes do you made at GPL?
Well, to just put some context behind what you just said, actually, my initial inroads into GPL was I became the Deputy Chief Executive Officer for Technical and Operations, and then subsequently became the Chief Executive Officer. Relative to your question, one of the major things that I initially identified was just the behavior. Behavior in leadership, behavior in job execution, and just the overall reaction to what I deem to be critical in a modern day power utility. And what I mean by that is, in a modern day utility, if I were to compare GPL to, Con Edison here in New York or any entity in New York, there's a general expectation that, customer expectation that is, that when a customer throws a light switch, they expect light to come on and to perform at a reasonable, reliable, and sustainable manner. And certainly, what I encountered at GPL was that was not the case. There were constant blackouts. There were issues surrounding losses in the system. There were issues related to activities that detracted from what we needed to do to be a more efficient organization. So those changes was generally precipitated around quality control leadership and management in trying to drive a process in the company that can get to the ultimate desirable objective, which is sustainable lights, minimizing the impact with the blackouts, and just building an organization from the ground up.
Okay. Now, what I noticed there, you were employed during the time when the PP was in office, this government, and you left or you were terminated when APNU was in office. My question to you is this: were you terminated or you left on your own?
It was a general consensus that they were going to bring in who they desired to be the next CEO. So there was really no expectation on my part to remain there. And there were some other issues related as well, maybe not specific to this program. Maybe we can get into that at another time, but it goes back to the new leadership that was coming in and what those expectations should have been and what they, in hindsight, what they weren't.
So you were actually replaced by APNU government. Am I
That's
right?
correct. That is correct.
Now, it has been generally known for some time now that GPL and its older name, whatever it was, had some outdated equipment, transformers or what have you. Were you able to update any of those?
If I were to take a step back so you can get an appreciation for what's required in terms of updating, you had a number of generators there in 2013 that were perhaps a good 20, approaching 30 years old. And I believe some of those generators are still in place today. Excuse me. So there was an active program that put in place that started to look at the various three entities, which is generation, distribution, and transmission. From a generation standpoint, I believe the Wieding Hoop facility was added to the grid with an additional, if I recall correctly, 26 megawatts. The Demerara and Berbice grid were two separate grids at that point in time. And under my tenure, it became one. In fact, it's referred to as the interconnected grid right now, the Demerara and Berbice interconnected grid. The remaining Essequibo, or what we call the isolated grid, remained by itself, but certainly it was a monumental feat to combine Demerara and Berbice. There was also what was referred to as a PUUP program, and I forget what that acronym means, but simply upgrading the transmission and distribution lines, as well as bringing in some new metering technology. It was called the AMI technology. And with those new meters, we're able to read a meter at a remote location. So rather than having a meter reader go out to the facility physically and do a physical reading, a reading was obtained in real time from, let's say, from the office or from a remote location.
Okay. My next question to you, and this already came from a listener, and let me ask all our listeners, please bear with me because I cannot ask all of your questions. Now, since in the 1980s, there were blackouts, or even before that at GPL. You came in, you met blackouts, and you left it, and blackouts continue. Why are the people of Guyana being suffering from blackouts for so long period of time? Why can't this be fixed?
Well, I'll offer my 2 cents here, and I would explain it in this manner. Pre-oil discovery and post-oil discovery. Okay, in the pre-oil discovery days, there were competing interests. Certainly the utility company have suffered from a lack of generation capacity, or what we call reserve capacity in industry. And that was an ongoing struggle. GPL was always in a position where they produced just enough power to satisfy demand. So at any point in time, if there were an increased demand, let's say a new housing scheme came on board, or an unusually hot temperatures, or something that would drive that demand, or even just doing maintenance. You needed to take a generation station down and perform routine maintenance. It was an issue because it left a deficit in the generation capacity. And it remained like that for, way before my time, as you indicated. So there was always this challenge of trying to produce power to keep up with the demand. And there were competing interests. GPL is not only the concern for whatever government of the day might be. There's infrastructure development, there are healthcare issues, there are a number of issues that are competing for a finite number of dollars. If I now shift my focus to post oil production, it certainly produces an increased advantage, meaning there are now more funds available in the country, and certainly addressing a deficit in generation, or just a deficit in the challenges of the grid, can now be, let's say, adequately addressed in a manner where in the past it may have been more of a challenge in doing so. So I would expect that the old performance of GPL post oil discovery to increase, or improve rather, significantly. So when I see and hear that some of the ongoing issues are still occurring, it becomes a little bit of a head scratcher. Post oil, or at least as of today, the country receives upwards of upwards of 10 million US dollars a day due to the oil production. And again, I'll say that upwards of $10 million per day. So certainly there are a lot more funds available post oil. After post oil than there were, prior to that. So to adequately address your question, why we're not seeing the improvements that we should be seeing, and why we're still faced with the same kinds of outages that go back to the 80s, as you indicated earlier. It's a little bit of a head scratcher.
Okay, from what you're telling our listeners here today is that demand has kept the pace of supply. But this has to be the fault of the engineers and the CEOs and so forth at GPL. Did they propose increase in electricity in various areas so as to meet the demand, new housing schemes and so forth?
Well, they certainly were aware of it, and I would say are aware of it. I mean, that's not a secret. And if you look at the development and expansion plan, you would see evidence of that awareness. The question then becomes, why are they executing to those needs that have been projected? Clearly, if you look at the development expansion plan, you would see numbers for 2024 that speaks to a demand of about 210 megawatts. Actually, it's a little higher than that for 2024. You see demands of about 250 megawatts, but we're really performing at about 210. So I think the question you're asking is that if we are aware, we being GPL or the current administration, if they're aware of that increased demand, why isn't there an adequate implementation process to address that?
From what I was made to understand is this: GPL is a semi-autonomous body or institution. And if you're telling me that government, that demand kept the pace of supply, does the government has to approve any increase in electricity from GPL? The government has to approve it before GPL expands its operation?
Oh, I think that would be a part of good, just prudent governance. I mean, if you were aware that the country's power demand is increasing and you're not doing something to keep up with that increased demand, then obviously there's an issue. So you mentioned a couple of times that demand and supply are abreast. Let me just adjust that a little bit. The demand is outpacing supply.
No, I never said they're abreast. I said demand has kept abreast of supply.
Well, right now it's not abreast, and it hasn't been abreast for quite some time. So demand is a little bit ahead of supply. If you look at any reliable or modern day, I would say, utility, you tend to see what's known as a reserve capacity, which means that you're not only keeping up with your demand, but you're adding a cushion on top of that. And that cushion is reserve capacity, just in case there was an unusual spike or there was a need to address, a maintenance schedule or something, anything that can pop up, an unusual, hot summer or an unusual weather or climate situation. So you never want to be just teetering at that level where the demand and supply is just neck and neck. You always want to have a reserve capacity in the event that you encounter a situation where you need that additional generation capacity.
I think you misunderstood my question. My question was this: if there needs to be an expansion of electricity, more output, more megawatt outputs, can GTL do that? GPL do that on its own, or it has to get a government approval?
Well, GPL is a part of the government. It's a governmental institution. So no person at GPL can just go out and procure additional generation. So it's part of the governmental process.
Okay, so the government has to approve it.
Mm.
Now, today, there are more blackouts than in the past. And as you said, but is this part of load shedding?
Well, I mean, there can be a number of issues. I mean, load shedding is just a response to the deficit, okay? Which means you have supply that's outpacing demand, and rather than, load shedding is just sharing the pain. So you just cycle the available generation capacity throughout the various communities, particularly at the high peak demand cycle. So you kind of share the pain, it's kind of a rolling blackout or brownout, because there is a finite number of generation capacity that's available, and the demand is not being met.
Explain to our listeners what is meant by load shedding.
Load shedding is a situation where you have, and if I can just use some numbers to adequately explain it, you have, let's say, 10 megawatts that's available to you in terms of generation capacity, but your demand is really 15. So there's a deficit of 5, okay? So certainly there's going to be an outage situation. So you have what's known as a rolling blackout. With the 10, you just say, okay, for example, I'm going to, just to name some communities, I'm going to put Campbellville in a load shedding environment, or basically I'm going to black out Campbellville for an hour. Then after that, and I'm going to roll it to Kitty. After that, I'm going to roll it up the East Coast, and eventually I'm getting to, further and further up the East Coast to Berbice or some region. So there's only 10 megawatts available during my example that's being shared by the various community. So you're load shedding until your overall demand now comes down. When it comes back down to 10, then everybody can receive power. But as long as it stays above that 10 megawatt, there will be some community somewhere that's going to be in a blackout situation.
So in other words, load shedding occurring because there's not enough power output to meet the demand.
Correct.
Okay, great. Now, I'll come back to blackouts in a few minutes then. During your tenure as the CEO of GPL, was GPL showing any profitability margin or anything of the sort?
I mean, it's not designed to be a profitable entity, and that's going to be a strange comment coming from me, particularly someone who's been in the corporate world for such a long time. So there was always a deficit in terms of having to pumping additional funds into GPL. GPL cannot survive or have not been able to survive based on their own generation of revenue. Okay? So there's always a need to go back to the government to ask for additional funds. You know, every year you see in the budget, there's a line item for GPL asking for additional funds to carry out programs. Now, here in part is this. You have a situation where, as you know, oil is a fluctuating commodity. And certainly GPL will not change oil or change tariffs in line with oil prices and you know, and so, you know, oil, the prices for oil is a significant part of GPL expenditures, you know, to the tune of maybe 75–80% of GPL's expenditures. So what governments have done in the past is to absorb that difference. So when oil prices are high, you know, the tariffs weren't raised and the government absorbed that. When tariffs were low, in some cases, it supplanted the times when they were high. I think one of those times was during my tenure where the oil prices was at historic lows. And rather than change the tariff rates, what was done at that time was instituted something known as rebates. So I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, there was a 5% rebate instituted, and shortly thereafter that, there was I think a 10% rebate. Okay. So in a sense, that's a 15% reduction in your utility bill. And I think also the tariff was reduced. The tariff in itself was reduced by 5%, if my memory serves me correctly. So that's an overall 20% reduction. Now, that's at a time where oil prices are low. Since that time to now, oil prices have certainly increased, right? And to my knowledge, I might be wrong on this, I don't believe the government has really increased the tariff, again, to be in line with those oil prices. So there is an issue there where the government is subsidizing your utility bill. So in that environment, when you ask, is GPL profitable? The answer is no. No organization can be profitable in a subsidizing environment.
Okay, so the government has to subsidize GPL. Okay, that's clarified right now. Now, the government during the time, I think was in 2017, no, 2012, 2013, they were clamoring to harness Amelia Falls, the Amelia Falls project. That did not pass in Parliament because I think the government had a minority. The AFC and APNU combined together had a majority, so they did not vote in favor of the Amelia Falls project. Do you think that was a mistake, or do you think the Amelia Falls project would have solved the blackout that we're having today?
Well, it certainly would have gone a long way in resolving the issue. Again, the issue is lack of generation capacity. So Amelia Falls or any other program, for that matter of fact, that adds to the generation capacity would go a long way in resolving the situation. specific to Omaila Falls, hindsight is 2020. Yeah, I would think I would classify it as a mistake because there was an opportunity lost there to increase the generation capacity. And if you look at, what the country is suffering as a consequence to that, the opportunity cost it would have been more than paid for itself there. So any opportunity we being Guyana, get to increase the the generation capacity is a step in the right direction.
What do you think of other sources of power, like wind power, solar power? Do you think we should harness those?
Well, I mean, Guyana is the land of many waters and streams. Hydropower has always been high on the list in terms of opportunity for Guyana. And, there is studies that have been done that says we have enough hydropower capacity to supply Guyana, Suriname, and a significant part of Brazil. In fact, there was an initiative called the Norte program that comprised of Guyana, Suriname, and Brazil to do specifically that. But where Guyana would have been the generator hub, let's say, of that power, utilizing the all sorts of streams and valleys and falls that are there in the country. So that's hydro is one. The solar index of Guyana is, I believe, it's at 85%, which is a very sweet spot, which and also means that we're in a prime location for solar power. And I think for the first time, I'm hearing that there's some activity around solar power. In fact, there was a couple of programs that should have been already implemented in 2023 and 24 that for some reason, haven't been able to come to fruition. So hydro and solar remains high on the list there in terms of opportunity. Wind, in my view, is a distant third. There is a distant third because to accommodate wind, you have to have a well-performing, fortified grid to deal with the flux of wind velocity, because obviously the wind doesn't blow at a consistent velocity, and it accelerates and decelerates. And if you were to bring wind into Guyana today, and you hook a wind farm to the grid, it will bring that entire grid down in a matter of minutes. It can't accommodate wind. So a lot of work from an infrastructural standpoint would need to be done in the transmission and distribution to accommodate wind.
Now, one of our listeners sent me a question, which I will ask the question, because I think it's a good question. And I think maybe it's an engineer, but I'm not sure. He asked the question. During your tenure as the CEO for GPL, you worked both under the PP government and APNU government. Did you ever make any recommendation to expand the GPL power output to meet the current demands that existed at the time?
Yes, every day, all day.
I want to know what was the response.
Again, and that's why I broke it into pre-oil and post-oil. Pre-oil, basically, you get in line, and when you ask for these additional funding for these additional projects, you take a number, and I mean that literally in terms of what the overall priorities of the country is, and we've been, like it or not, living for a very long time on the blackout situations, and that's in my view, that's a calculus of the government, either government, when it comes to addressing that versus addressing maybe other programs in the country. So the answer to that is yes. As the power company with the interests of the power company, of course you're going to make those requests to increase generation capacity. Of course you're going to make that request to improve your transmission lines. Of course you're going to make the request to introduce your distribution, your distributive systems. But that request gets baked into, an overall priority of the country.
Let me just take a break here for commercial. Folks, if you're living in Queens and its surrounding areas, you can do all your West Indian food shopping from one supplier. They're located in Queens, I think it's on 101 Avenue. And you can get your groceries done there, your West Indian food, curries, roti, fish, meat, whatever. You get it all from there. And you can use your EBT card or your credit card. You can shop online, all from onesupplier.com, and your groceries or whatever you ordered will be delivered directly to your home. Call this number, 718-551-3292. 718-551-3292 for all your West Indian shopping needs, all from one supplier. Go to the website, allfromonesupplier.com. And just to mention as well, Globespan is 30 years old this year. One of the oldest reigning travel agencies that exist, I think. And they're located in New York here, Rosalton and Corriverton, and also Val Park in Guyana, and Chaguanas in Trinidad and Tobago. They have upcoming trips planned to Dubai, India, South Africa, Norway. You can make your reservation now and you'll have a whale of a time. I can tell you that. So for all your traveling needs, contact Globespan Television at 718-845-0437. 718-845-0437 for all your traveling needs to the Caribbean, to Africa, to Asia, any part of the world. Globespan will get you there. Thanks. Okay, coming back to you now, Mr. Welch. Now, the question that is on everybody's mind is that when and how this power blackout will stop.
Here's a simple answer. Invest in generation capacity now. Okay? We've seen examples where the government of the day is able to bring in additional capacity. There is a flotilla or a floating generation ship there in the country at the moment that I believe is generating some, 30 megawatts of power to make up for the deficit or help make up for the deficit in the generation capacity. More of that needs to be done. Okay, and that's something that can be done in real time. I mean, I think they brought that ship in a matter of weeks. Okay, well, that's not the only ship that can come in. Additional ships can come in. There was also the ability to ramp up solar power. Okay. There are a number of low-hanging fruit from a hydro standpoint that can be taken advantage of. So there are a number of avenues to pursue in terms of increasing generation.
But even with the additional power from the ship, there are still constant blackouts, and blackouts are having in large swaths. I can say this because I experienced it myself at the quarantine. If there's a blackout in the quarantine, and I want you to explain to the people why this is happening. It will start from New Amsterdam and it end at Wim, at Auckland. All those villages will be blocked out. And then if there's one further east, it will start from Wim and go all the way to Skeldon. Why blackouts are occurring in such large swaths? Look at it either way. It's a 30-mile radius span from New Amsterdam to Auckland there, and from Auckland to Skeldon. Why blackouts are happening in such large swaths?
Well, I'm going to address the functionality of the grid. Okay. and I'm going to refer to, I'm going to compare that to, a developed nation, let's say the U.S. or, where have you. Whenever there is an issue or a fault in the system that would precipitate a malfunction or a blackout, that fault can be restricted to the area that it occurs in. Okay. In the case of Guyana, that fault isn't restricted to the area, and that fault makes its way back to the nearest generation station. And the generation station, recognizing that fault, automatically shuts down. Okay, and it shuts down as a protective mechanism because you don't want that fault to blow up a piston or damage your engine, a generation engine, in whatever way. So that, as a precaution, that facility shuts down. When that facility shuts down, now you have an overall deficit in the system because that facility that shut down is no longer producing power, and it becomes a domino effect. The system now recognizes a deficit or a significant deficit in power generation, and all the generators in the countries begin to go down one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. And that's referred to as a total shutdown there in the country. So the entire country goes dark. And there are a number of things that can precipitate that. It can be the fault that you previously mentioned. It can be a drunk driver running into a backbone pole and taking that pole down, which is sending that fault back to the closest generation facility. So as a precaution, the whole country goes down. Right. So you then now have to identify where that fault occurs, go out and address that fault, and then bring the country back up one generator, one power station at a time. Okay. And that, in my tenure, that took about a good, if everything was done correctly, a good 20 to a half hour to do that. Okay. And that's just taking the system down and bringing it up. Addressing the fault now, if there's a kind of a unique root cause of that fault that takes some additional time to resolve, then certainly you've got to go out and address that. Now, you can manually isolate that fault, which means someone has to go out and flip a switch in that facility to isolate that problem, because that's part of the functionality of the system. GPL can take down a particular system, a particular area to do, let's say, maintenance work, which means someone goes out and manually flips a switch to cut off power in that specific area. So that same kind of thing is being done now to put the country back on stream after a total system shutdown. Whereas again, comparatively in the rest of the world, that fault is isolated to that community, and the rest of the country, remains illuminated. And while you address that specific area that's causing the fault, whether it's two wires that came into contact with one another, a drunk driver took a backbone pole out, or whatever may have caused the fault.
So why GPL, then my question is this, why GPL cannot isolate the large swaths of blackouts by installing more generators in different areas so that if there's a blackout, it's confined to one or two villages only, rather than 25, 30 villages? Why it can't be confined to those areas, confined to small areas?
Right, and I understand the question, but to clarify, in that case, where there is a fault in the system, it's not a generation problem. Okay, you can have a situation where, let's say, a transformer blows up, okay, in a particular area, and that fault makes its way all the way back to the power station. Okay, it's not a generation issue. It's an isolation issue, an issue where that fault should have been isolated to a certain area. So in the developed world, that's known as a protection scheme to isolate that generation, to isolate that particular fault. We do not have that in Guyana. We do not have the ability to isolate the fault.
Well,
That
why
specific
why is
area.
that? Why is that though? Why?
Well, that's, I mean, in my tenure, I think the company Siemens had come in and they perform a study that of what would be required to implement that kind of a protection scheme. And it was, there was some significant dollars at that time. And again, we go back to priority. Would the government be willing to spend that money, to deploy that kind of a protection scheme that would enable the performance of the grid to isolate a fault? Or are they looking at spending that money elsewhere at the time? So that has been the issue. I mean, it's not rocket science. I mean, the world over, utility grids the world over experience isolated faults. But you don't find the developed countries where that entire country or that entire region of a country would go down because of that particular fault.
Now, you said that the demand right now, the output is 210 megawatts. But in reality, 210 megawatts do not reach the end line because there are line losses, which and that has been calculated between 18 and 20% line losses, and also theft. Well, let's deal with line losses first. Why so high a percentage of line losses is occurring in the country?
Well, you have old systems. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, during my tenure, there was the PUUP program, which had gone in and tried to upgrade transmission lines. But even with that program, it didn't address all the required needs. It was just a portion of that. And likewise with distribution systems, those systems have to be upgraded. I mean, there are new conductors that need to be put in place, new isolators, new poles need to be planted, a number of things that would need to be done to address that situation. So again, a concerted effort needed to be put in place to address that on a grand scheme, not just as a piece. And I will say this, you didn't bring it up, but there is a looming initiative to bring on stream a 300 megawatt gas-fired plant out of Wales. Okay, now if that program were to come into fruition today, if today, let's say that a gas plant became available, we still couldn't accept power from it. And we couldn't accept power from it because the transmission and distribution system is not adequate. Okay, so the transmission and distribution system needs to be updated in parallel with the increased generation capacity. Okay, those if my memory serves me correctly, you need a 230 kilovolt transmission line to transmit that power coming from that facility, that new facility. Okay, in today's world, the transmission lines for GPL is 69 kV. So again, 230, 69.
Okay. Now, how can we prevent theft?
Well, theft is it's a behavioral issue. Okay, and there will need to be a concerted effort around theft. I mentioned earlier that during my tenure, I brought into the Guyana the AMI meters. Okay, and with those meters, you had the ability, or you have the ability, to monitor the performance of a specific meter. So I can be, if you had one of those AMI meters installed at your facility, I can look in real time of what your consumption is. Okay. And if I see your consumption go from some level of consumption to zero, then I know there is a problem. Okay. Either there was a blackout in your area that you went from some level of consumption to zero, or there's some kind of meter tampering or some sort of fraudulent activity that's occurring. So there would be a need then to go out and verify this. So if you send someone out to Dr. Rose's house and you says, well, Dr. Rose's house there are lights that's out there, but he's showing a zero consumption, then you know there's some sort of theft that's occurring. But it takes someone to act on that. Someone has to go out and verify that. So again, now you're back into a behavioral issue. After you recognize a problem, someone needs to go out and verify that is the case, and then take action.
In your experience, who are the largest thieves of power in Guyana? Are private citizens or businesses?
By far, businesses. I mean, not even it's not even debatable. You can have several members of a community stealing electricity that would not equate to one business. So by far, it's what's referred to as the high demand customers, and usually regular residents would not be classified as a high demand customer unless maybe that regular resident has a business at their facility.
And during your tenure again, were any business conglomerates, anyone caught stealing electricity?
Yes.
And what was the penalties?
Well, initially when they're caught, you give them the opportunity to rectify it. So they would have to come in and rectify the situation. If there's an issue that, there are instances where you're now trying to determine how long that person has been stealing. Okay. And at my era, there was legislation in place that says GPL can go back as far as 24 months.
Okay.
And assess charges based on that. So I will then have to, just using you as an example, Dr. Rose, I would then have to go into your establishment, look at your usage in terms of the equipment that you have installed in your facility, and what the ratings would be for that equipment, and come up with a hypothetical current consumption, and then go back 24 months and charge you for that.
But don't you think if the penalties were tougher than those, let's say someone get caught and they serve time in jail, it would have been reduced theft, rather than giving them the opportunity to rectify it and pay the back utilization or the back fees or whatever it is? Do you think that was a bit too soft of a penalty?
Yes. And in fact, one of the things that I tried to do in the U.S. here, we have something known as traffic court. If you have a traffic violation, I mean, you're not going to be caught up in the system with murderers and those sorts of things. There's a separate court for you to go to.
Right.
I had tried to implement a system where we have an electricity theft court, strictly dealing with electricity thefts. And that was put forward, but never really went anywhere. And you have to understand, and maybe I'll say something here that'll be a little explosive. You will be, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but some of the folks that are found, the business folks that is, that are found to be electricity thieves are people that, you scratch your head and wonder, well, certainly they've got the money to pay. So it's not a matter of them not having the money to pay. but they're still engaged in this activity. And now you're getting into an area of fraudulency where that particular business customer or high demand customer is in cahoots with entities within GPL to foster that kind of activity to go forward. And that was an area that I focused on heavily while I was there.
Okay. Well, that was good. And well, even today, they said theft is still going along and line losses. So if you're losing quarter of your output, then that's a lot. Now,
Yes.
what's the future you think holds for GPL as we speak? What the current administration or the current executive body has to do at GPL to rectify these blackouts and to bring trust back to the company? Because every day there are blackouts. I'm saying every day there are blackouts.
Well, the first thing is increasing generation capacity. That's the first thing.
But how would they do that now? Where that extra power coming from?
It can come from anywhere. Dr. Rose, I can tomorrow look at power generation suppliers. They're all over the world.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Tomorrow I can wake up and look at power generation suppliers and invite them to come to Guyana to produce power.
Okay.
Okay. So it's an effort that's required. Okay. You see, I mean, we've demonstrated we have that ability. There's a floating ship now in the country producing 30 megawatts or so. Okay. The company that's doing that is not the only company in the world that have such a ship. Okay, so there are suppliers throughout the world that would have the ability to come in on relatively short notice to address that shortfall. Okay, that's one. Two, we can incentivize power supplier to come in and build a facility as part of a PPA, power sharing agreement, where we can buy power from that supplier for a period of time. Usually, those PPA suppliers would require, a 10 to 20 year contract. Say, yes, we will come, we will build a facility, and we will charge you to buy power from us. There is also an EPC, an engineering design and construct facility, where they would come in and build a facility, and then we would run it. So there are all sorts of ways we could be done. I mean, there's no shortage of solutions. Okay, the question I think you're asking is why don't we go out and just do something? So there's no shortage of what can be done. It's the willingness to do it.
And you said you can look tomorrow and get some power suppliers, but did anyone ever from the government ever contacted you or ask you to help or anything of the sort?
No.
And you're not going to volunteer your help to them?
All right. Listen, I possessed a unique set of skills, not to quote that commercial. And I'm not the only one, by the way, that can offer assistance. This, and I can't say this as honestly or forcefully as possible, this isn't rocket science. Okay, there are suppliers, power suppliers all over this world with that ability to bring power to your country. Okay. With the immediacy of a floating ship, I mean, that's something in short order that can be done in a matter of weeks. Okay. To something that's more sustained or more labor intensive in terms of building a facility and then selling the power back to the government of the day, or just building a facility and then turning that facility over to the government to own and operate. So there is no shortage of possibilities.
I hear you on that one. Now the government is working on a gas to shore project. You heard about that? You
Right.
think that will alleviate the problems of blackouts and so forth?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is how we do it. Okay. So as I mentioned before, you can have that facility up and running, the gas to shore project up and running tomorrow. When I say up and running, I mean the generation piece of it is available. Okay. The question then becomes, is the grid in a condition to accept that power? And the answer to that is no. Okay. So those two things have to occur in parallel. You know, as you're trying to get the gas to shore project on stream, you also have to get the grid updated to accept that power.
Now, when it's updated, you got bring in new generators and those things to help distribute the power. What's updating the grid means?
Updating the grid simply means you would have, for example, there are at least two kinds of transmission lines. There is the what's known as the patridge transmission lines, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, that can conduct as much as 30 to 35 megawatts of power. Okay. Then there's the Canton transmission lines that can do up to 70. So depending on your transmission scheme and what area you're looking at, and then there are others, it's not only those two, there are others as well. So depending on your transmission scheme, you have to put a line in place to accommodate that. That's one. Two, you have to do it in parallel. Parallel meaning if I'm going to put a transmission line in place, I want the ability to, in the event that there is a fault on the line, I can shut that line down and then simultaneously transmit that power on a parallel line. Okay. In all of Guyana today, there's only one parallel line that exists, and that's the line from Garden of Eden to New Georgetown. Okay. So if there is an issue in the transmission line that's going from, let's say, Georgetown to Berbice on the transmission line, then that entire system goes down. You know, there's no way to address that transmission problem and still have power being transmitted. So there is a need to have parallel lines in the entire country, parallel transmission lines.
Well, I'm sure you have contacts at GPL and those places. Is there any indication from your part to say that the government is updating the grid to accommodate the output from the gas to shore project?
Well, I mean, like you, I mean, I read reports that would indicate that they are, but how effective is that implementation process? You know, can be a head scratcher. You know, we were told that, for example, the solar power capability was supposed to be in stream in 2023, 2024. Okay. There's no solar farm in Guyana now that's supplying power. So there's some kind of delay or something went awry or some issue there with that. On the gas to energy program, you know, we're being told that by 2025, that program should be up and running. Based on my knowledge, I mean, I worked for Eaton Corporation, the electrical power division. And there are only a few suppliers that are making the kind of equipment that would go into that generation, the gas energy generation facility. It's Eaton, ABB, Siemens, and Square D. Okay, so 3 or 4 suppliers globally, and all of those suppliers have a backlog, and that backlog was generated from the pandemic. Okay, so if you were to ask me when that generation facility, gas to energy generation facility will come on stream, I would tell you that's not until 2026 at best, meaning we hit a home run. And Guyana is not known for hitting home runs in terms of execution. Okay, so there's a time period between now and the supposed home run period, 2026. That's a 2-year gap. So something needs to be done to bridge that gap. Okay, in terms of power generation, in terms of upgrading the transmission and distribution system. So if that's not done, we will be in this perpetual power outage situation.
Now, let's go segment by segment here. And you, as the CEO, should know that Guyana in like the palm of your hands. Up the Berbice, which starts from a Barry Bridge or a Barry Creek to Rosignol. How many distribution GPL has it? How many distribution centers GPL has in that area?
There's one.
And it's
There's
an
one.
ongoing. It's an ongoing.
Well, there's one. Well, let me answer the question this way, so the audience has an appreciation for it. The transmission lines are responsible for transmitting the power, let's say from Sophia to Canefield, part of Berbice. Okay. Along the way, there are distribution lines. So that power, as it travels from Sophia to Canefield on the transmission line, there is an off-ramp that goes to the substation in the communities between Sophia and Canefield. Okay, and that off-ramp is referred to as a substation. There's one at Columbia, there's one at Good Hope, there's one at Anvawak, there's one certainly at Canefield. So those off-ramps from the transmission line gets downloaded into those substations, and then those substations send the powers through the distribution lines to your homes, businesses, and so forth. Okay? So if you don't have an adequate distribution line, and it doesn't matter what you do on the transmission side, okay? And if you have an adequate transmission line and you don't have adequate distribution lines, then that's a problem. Now, here's the thing with Guyana currently, and staying consistent with the Sophia to Canefield. That is one line, okay? And one long line, okay? So the longer the lines, the more degradation in current you have, meaning as the distance increases, the voltage fluctuation then increases. Okay, and people then have fluctuation in current and damaging the equipment and so forth. Okay, I mentioned earlier before a protection mechanism. There is now another mechanism that I will mention. It's known as a capacitor bank. And a capacitor bank would have the ability to take that power from Sophia, okay? And as it lands, let's say in Colombia, we store the same efficiencies that can then go on to Good Hope or go on to Anvawak and go on to Canefield. Without those capacitor banks, you just have a long line of degradation. Okay, so the communities that are closer to Sophia would experience reasonable power. The ones that are furthest away from Sophia, let's say going to Anvawak, would see that the would experience greater fluctuation in current. We call it low voltage there in the country.
Okay. Now, so you're saying for Region 5, which is West Coast Borvis, from Barry all the way to Rosignol, is only one substation there, and it's at Anvawak.
No. There's several substations there. Okay, those substations have to install what's known as capacitor banks. That's a device in order to adequately transmit the power. Absent the capacitor banks, it just becomes a long line of distribution power. So there needs to be an investment on capacitor banks.
Okay. And up the quarantine from New Amsterdam all the way to Crabble Creek or further up, how many substations are in that region? Do you know?
From where to where?
From New Amsterdam all the way to Crabble Creek at the end of the road.
I can't recall, but
Okay.
there are a number of them.
How many Georgetown in Region 4? Well, Georgetown area alone.
Well, you would have a substation basically stationed in tandem with a power station, because something needs to downgrade the power and then distribute the power out to the community. There isn't a 100% need to have a power station, but you need to have the ability to take high voltage, okay, which is 69 kV, lower it to 13.8 kV, and then send it to the homes, to your outlets of about 120 volts. And so that ability needs to be there at every step of the way along the transmission and distribution system. The capacitor banks that I was mentioning manages that, okay, to where the distribution power, if you're aware with a capacitor is like a battery, okay, in loose terms, that has the ability to store power and then give that power out. Okay, in your homes, let's say your television has a capacitor. If you ever notice when you turn the power of your TV off, it doesn't automatically go off. It goes through a gradual downturn to zero. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And it's in that same manner. When you turn your TV on, that capacitor has the energy to turn it on instantaneously because it's stored energy in there. So that capacitor banks needs to be implemented each step of the way.
Now, my question, I was trying to get to this question. So all these outlying substations in the various regions are being powered by the one in Kingston, GPL in Kingston?
I'm sorry, what can you ask that
All
again?
the power stations throughout the country in the outlying regions, where the power comes from, in Kingston, Georgetown?
No, the power comes from the power station. So if I went up the East Coast, if my memory serves me correctly, you have power being generated at Sophia. You have power being generated at Columbia. You have power
How it's being generated there? How? Independent of Kingston?
No, yeah, they're separate power stations, separate generators at each of those locations.
Or they have power generators in each of those locations.
Right.
Okay, got you.
Right. So they're power station at each of those locations on from Sophia to Canefield and beyond. Okay. that power is then being harnessed to address not only the local communities there, but also you can ramp that power back up and transmit it further down. So in a sense, you can have power from Garden of Eden being sent all the way up to Berbice.
No, but that doesn't make sense to me. Why can't there be a power generator in Borbisa itself to generate its own power there?
There is, but okay. Keep this in mind. At each power station, there is a local demand.
Yes.
Okay, so that power station has to satisfy that local demand.
Right.
If it's not able to satisfy that local demand, there is, let's say, surplus energy, for lack of a better term, coming from Kingston, coming from Garden of Eden, coming from Wiedenhoek, coming from all over the country. And it's coming there via the transmission lines. Okay, so if let's say Canefield has a shortage of addressing that immediate New Amsterdam area, okay, let's say the Canefield location isn't able to address that immediate area, power can be pulled from Anvawak. It can be pulled from as far down as Kingston. It's one transmission line transmitting power.
Now, one of our listeners, and I was to ask you this question, but he or she beats me to it. She said that you're doing a good job in explaining, but what she don't understand is this. If you're saying that each region has its own power generating system, and if it's not enough, then you have to get surplus from elsewhere. The question this person is asking, why can't there be 2 generators there or 3 generators there to provide the adequate power needed for each region? And in this case, we will not have any blackouts. It's money, it's costly, but don't you think that's a good idea?
Yes. Okay. You can have power generation ability either locally for that immediate area, or you can pull it from Wiedenhoek to New Amsterdam.
But why
Okay.
take it from so far, though?
Typically, those communities can't always address the need. Okay, so I think if I think the question you're asking is, if Anvawak, for example, okay, that community has a demand, why not put the power in Anvawak that would address Anvawak's needs?
Exactly. Well,
Right?
the entire West Coast Barbies, it means
Right.
2 or 3 generators to
Right.
give the output.
Okay, so now, and that's a good question, because now you're talking about the overall planning scheme
Right.
of the country, okay? And we have failed miserably on that front, okay? There are increasing housing schemes that come on board, okay? Which means the power plant that's closest to that housing scheme should be updated. You don't see that. What you see is a movement afoot to pull the power from someplace else to address that increased demand in that housing scheme. Okay, and that really isn't unusual. Okay, if your overall generation scheme can address the need of your overall generation need. So you don't necessarily have to put your generation station specifically in that area of demand, because you have the ability to pull power from all over, pull generation capacity from all over. The problem that Guyana has is that we have a shortfall all over, so there's nothing to pull.
But don't you think it would be better if GPL served Georgetown, let's say Region 4 from Micah to wherever up the bank there, that way? And then the rest of the regions have their own generators to provide power for them. If let's say region 10 need 50 kilowatts or megawatts, then you put, and a generator can only give you 10, then you put 5 generators there to meet the demand there, and so forth in all the regions. In this case, we will not have blackouts.
Okay, let me be the devil's advocate then. Okay, if you put that capacity there in region 10, and then for some reason region 10 expands and exceeds what you just placed there, okay, then what?
It's simple. The answer is simple. You add another generator.
Okay. Now you're getting into and that's a great response. Now you're getting into where are the best places to put your power that would optimize your system.
Right.
Okay. And in that case, an overall power scheme needs to be developed. And that power scheme would incorporate what the future projected demands will be. So you look at your overall forecast. It says, okay, in 5 years from now, we expect this community to grow by X factor. Okay, and if this community goes by X factor, either I put that additional power station in that specific community or I pull it from a nearby community. Okay, so depending on the type of investment that's required, you can make an educated decision on that front. I will tell you, in Anvawak has General Motors generators. Okay, General Motors has been out of the generation business for 40, 50 years. So it would make sense that if you increase the power generation capacity for Anvawak or the neighboring communities, that you put brand new engines in there, and those brand new engines would have to supply not only Anvawak but also the surrounding community. So there needs to be a very cognitive effort in designing your power scheme or your generation scheme to supply your country or community or whatever the case may be. So that's where, in my view, the lacking skills are not being apparent. That's where the challenge is. Okay, you need to step back and say, okay, here's where we are today. Here's where we plan to be in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and then plan accordingly.
Okay. Let me pay some bills here. For all our listeners and for all the residents of the Queens and surrounding areas, you can shop at allfromonesupplier.com. You can buy all your food products online. You can buy your groceries online, your curries, your roti, your fresh fish, your meat, everything online. And you can use your credit card or an EBT card as well. All for One Supply will deliver your groceries or your food and everything directly to your home. You don't even have to leave where you're living. Just give them a call or go online and place the order. The number is 718-551-3292. That's 718-551-3292. And I'll also go over to Globespan Television. 30 years in the business this year. So they have to be doing an extremely good job in order to survive in the travel industry for that length of time. They have upcoming tours planned for Dubai, India, South Africa, Norway, and other countries. You can book your tickets now to get there. It will be a fun-loving trip for you all. They have offices in New York, Rosalton, Herverton, and Val Park in Guyana, and in Chaguanas in Trinidad and Tobago. The number in Guyana is 718-845-0437. That's the number in New York, rather. 718-845-0437. So go to TravelSpan for all your traveling needs. And go to allforonesupplier.com for all your West Indian food and groceries. All from one. One is a number. All from one. Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Welch. We have a few minutes more to go. Oh, we have some time more to go. So you're saying the gas to shore project will relieve some of the blackouts and so forth. But the question is, would it relieve all of it? Because Guyana is developing and companies coming down there and seeing blackouts, how would we expect them to invest? They want to know electricity is there every day and limited blackouts. What's your views on that?
Well, the shortfall in power supply has always been a detractor to investors. Typically, when you talk to investors and you tell them that in order to come in the country, you have to walk with your power supply, that's not something they're interested in. Okay? There is the hotel industry that view that as a necessary evil, let's say. So if they're going to come and they're going to build a new hotel, they're going to obviously put in generators to address the shortfall of GPL. And if a company is coming in to build, let's say, a glass factory, which is a very high consumption energy type operation, and you tell them that they have to bring their generation capacity with them, that's a non-starter, because that's an added cost to their business endeavor. And that would make them not so competitive. Let's say if they were to come and then have to install their own generators to facilitate that business endeavor. So the answer then becomes the government of the day needs to address that. Okay, this is more than just a blackout situation. You're dealing with the development of the country. Okay, and if you look at it in those terms, it becomes even more vital. Okay, as an investor, companies don't want to come in and have to bring their own infrastructure that should have also been in there. I mean, if you as an investor, Dr. Rose, going into a given community and you're told that, well, you're going to have to build the roads to get to your facility, then you're going to have to build the energy infrastructure to supply your facility, then you're going to have to build all sort of support type mechanisms. You would easily say, well, why don't I just go to a country that already have all those things in place?
That is so true. Deep down in you, tell our listeners tonight, what can be done to end these blackouts? Outline it, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is. What you think can be done to outline these blackouts based on your knowledge, technical knowledge, and experience?
Number one, generation. I think the current government of the day is playing a silly game. And that game is trying to bridge the gap without any enormous investment. When I say bridge the gap, I mean between now and 2026, 2027, okay, and that's before the gas to energy project come online. There is a reluctance, in my view, there is a reluctance to make any substantial investment in terms of power generation. And to me, that's short-sighted. In my view, go ahead and make the investment, okay? You will, even when the gas to energy project comes on stream with the additional 300 megawatts, okay, that doesn't end the demand for energy. The demand will continue to grow, okay? We have rice farmers, banks DIH, and existing industries that are self-generating that would love to get on the grid. And that's a significant increase in capacity requirements. So even if you address the day-to-day mundane needs of the country, when I say that, I mean the increase in housing schemes, the increase in business related to the oil and gas, or related to the mining industry. Even if you address that in the short term, you still have this significant looming demand that's going to come. Okay, the oil and gas industry will bring all sorts of requirements and needs into the country. So I don't think the government should be penny pinching right now in terms of generation capacity. I don't think they should be penny pinching in terms of upgrading the transmission and distribution lines. Okay, to me, those are well-deserved investments that will bear fruit. And earlier I said there is a post-oil mentality, a pre-oil, mentality, and a post-oil mentality. Okay, we are now in the post-oil mentality. So a lot of the competing interests that we had to juggle prior to oil should be, just moved out of the way. Okay, we're a country now that's receiving in excess of 10 million US dollars per day. Okay, now I'm not saying all of that should go to GPL and address the challenges, but certainly there is more money available than ever in Guyana's history to address these concerns.
Now, the onus will be on GPL to deliver, and GPL currently is not delivering, and this is not a swipe on GPL. Everybody in Guyana knows there are blackouts, and right now there's drought going on. The place is hot. When there are blackouts, people can't even sleep. They have to go out and sit on the veranda because the fans, nothing work. Now, the thing is, and when there are blackouts and the power comes back on, people's equipment, their fridges and so forth are being damaged. No compensation from GPL. Now, don't you think GPL has some responsibility to the citizens to make sure that they receive adequate power? Because, as I said, I'm out of quarantine. And on weekends, when there's a power outage there, it lasts for 5-6 hours. Not 1 hour or 2 hours, 5-6 hours. So don't you think GPL is obligated to solve that problem and solve it very, very fast?
Yeah, I'll answer that question on two fronts. Okay, in the developed world, the answer is a resounding yes. Okay, the power utility company has the responsibility to satisfy the needs of the customer. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Okay, in Guyana's sense, that response seems to be moderated. Okay, to the point where you say, okay, the utility company has that responsibility, and that but is what gets you in trouble. Okay, because that but then becomes a competing interest type environment. I'm of the position that says GPL is so important to the country, they shouldn't be a but. Okay, and for once, it should be a full-on assault on resolving this blackout issue, because it has tremendous implications. Ranging from school kids being able to adequately study for their exams or whatever the case might be, to companies needing that energy to perform. Okay. And when you get into that aspect of things, I mean, companies, they're in business to make money. Okay. And they would like to eliminate all obstacles that get in the way of that. And there are enough obstacles in the traditional sense of the business, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a mining, whatever business, a manufacturing facility. There are enough challenges to deal with those respective industries without the power issue. But when you add the power issue on top of that, you're then creating an Herculean task for those businesses and communities. Okay, so I was always of the mindset, and it's one of the things that I drove is that the expectation for GPL is when a customer, any customer, whether it's a residence, a commercial, industrial business, a sector, when they hit that switch, okay, the expectation is the lights will come on. Case point, end the story. Right? Now, if that, for some reason, the light doesn't come on, then it becomes a very targeted issue. And that targeted issue is, I am not so much interested in why it didn't come on. I am more interested in when will it come back on. Okay? Right. So you GPL can go through all the elaborate explanations as to this happened and that happened and this issue and that issue, which is basically noise to the consumer. Okay? They're focused now on okay, the light's out, I see it, I'm in darkness. When will the lights come back on? Just tell me that so I can resume my life accordingly.
We are coming to the end of the program. It's been a very good educational program for all our listeners when it comes to why we have these blackouts and so forth. But what advice you will give to GPL and by extension the government about to end this blackout briefly?
Again, it's I said it a couple of times. One, okay, address the shortfall, the immediate shortfall, even if it means duplicating investment in generation. When I say duplicating, you have this looming implementation of the gas to energy program. Don't wait on that, because as you wait on that to take effect, folks are being inconvenienced, left, right, and center. So put a short-term process in place. And as I think I mentioned, you can go out to the global supply base for generation literally tomorrow and increase your generation capacity in a matter of weeks. There are all sorts of strategies that you could entertain to do that.
We have come to the end of the program. What are your closing remarks?
Well, we as a country, Guyana, we've always had enormous potential. Okay, with the gas to energy project, and with the overall oil findings, those opportunities have increased exponentially, and we haven't been able to address adequately that exponential increase. It seems like we're still stuck in the pre-oil era. Okay, so our mindset needs to shift, and not just shift in terms of plans or thought, but shift in terms of action. Okay, specifically to energy generation and addressing the historical shortfall in the supply of energy to the country.
Okay, good, thanks. Now, I want to say a special thanks to all our listeners and to our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be able to broadcast. And also, thanks to Noor Singh and Devin Bisoon and Ryan Gobin for making this program available to all our listeners. I also want to say that the time has come for two things in Guyana. One, why when someone employed by the government, they have to wait 3 to 4 months before they get a first paycheck? It is still happening. It was told to me someone start working since in June, and they haven't got the first paycheck as yet. So June, July, August passed. September, today is the last of September, and they're still to receive a paycheck. This should not happen in Guyana with all the modern technology there and the accountants and everything else. So I hope the person in charge of the public Ministry of Public Service can adjust that system. It should take people a month before they get a first paycheck, not 3 months, not 4 months. And as we talked today about the power blackout, I am hoping that we can solve this problem as soon as possible. As soon as possible. And I know the government is trying to fix it. I heard Prime Minister Mark Blue say he will not spare nothing in order to get the power blackout, end the power blackout, which is a good sign on his part. So we hope that we can solve this problem. And also our internet, it's still cutting off when you're talking to people in Guyana. I hope the internet services are listening and can provide better service. And last but not least, this is my book. It's called A Race to the Finish Line, the election of Barack Hussein Obama as the first Black president of the United States. You can get your orders from all the major bookstores, Amazon, etc., etc. It's not expensive. It's just $39.95, $40 US. But by mid-November, hard copies will come in place, and that will cost over $200. So it's best to get a soft paperback now, and you will enjoy the reading. It's filled with a lot of pictures and everything going back to Obama's childhood days. So it will be a good read for all of you. Thank you very much for listening, and may God bless all of you, and God bless Guyana as well. Thank you. And to you, Mr. Welch, thanks for coming on. You have shined, give us some education experience on what's taking place in Guyana. And I hope those who are in charge will listen to you and probably apply some of your recommendations. That will do the country very, very, very well at this stage because of the blackout we're having. So thanks again, Mr. Welch, for coming on. And in future, we'll have you on maybe to see if there's any difference or less blackouts and so forth. And maybe you'll be able to assess the situation for us again. So thanks to you once again for coming on.
No problem.
Good night,
Pleasure's
everyone.
mine.
And thanks.